Welcome, welcome, welcome. This is part of our continuing series where we talk to people who are informed on the left, on the right, professors, anybody, activists who knows about where we're going in America with political division. Also today, it's our privilege to talk to Professor Wall. He has a background in history and education, and we'll be interviewing him in just a second. But first, check this out. Okay. Now, Professor Wall, you may have seen, he runs this podcast, the Secession Speakeasy, discussing topics the elites have forbidden us to discuss. What's a little bit more about that? On this terrestrial ball, we discuss the issues of the day through the lens of history and the principle of subsidiarity, with an emphasis on proposed solutions based in self-responsibility, self-discipline, and self-determination. We love that word here, self-determination. We publish our non-exclusive articles, podcasts, and vlogs on our main site, keepgovlocal.com, and we publish exclusive material here on our locals page. We seek to promote respectful discussion to find real solutions which are based in local communities and families. Professor Wall, what is the show Secession Speakeasy about?
Well, I'll need to give you some very quick background to how it came about here, so you can so you can see where we came, because it was almost by accident that this all came together the way it did. So just so people are quickly aware, it's like I even as a kid, I was always one of those people who I promoted my local area first. I was born and raised in Minnesota. I don't live there anymore, but I was born and raised there. And I always told people when they were like, it was like, oh, American. I was like, no. I said, I'm Minnesotan. I said, I'm Minnesotan. He's like, and I always promoted that even as a kid. So, I went to a big international gathering when I was in high school, and I didn't bring the American flag. I brought the Minnesota flag. So I was all about the promoting my locality. But moving forward to how this particular podcast got started, the co-founder of the podcast, Mr. Green, and myself, we kind of noticed, I think it was around 2022, early 2022, we noticed that we were both kind of had come to the conclusion that, for all the ills that America was dealing with, that secession was probably the best approach to solving the problems. Because we tried a number of other things, and we were like, there was always that pesky federal government just standing in the way. It was like, and it seemed like nothing we tried seemed to work. And so we both had come to the conclusion that, hey, secession is probably the best approach here at this point. And we noticed that basically there was no analysis, because we were big on alternative media. We were watching, Tucker Carlson, Glenn Greenwald, a lot of these other Judge Napolitano, it was like all these different shows. And what we noticed was that there was nothing there that was approaching things from a secessionist point of view. Judge Napolitano would bring it up occasionally, but it was not the main focus of his podcast, and I get that. He's more talking libertarian stuff. I think Tom Woods, the libertarian commentator, he also was like that. Like he was pro-secession, but that wasn't the main thrust of his podcast, so he wouldn't be evaluating things from there. So we were like, what if we did something that was... We analyze things in the world from the secessionist perspective. Just bring this. It seemed like there was this niche just sitting there waiting to be grabbed. And so we decided to do that. We founded our show, the show From Steel to Secession AM, off of that. And that was mainly a discussion show. We would take the events going on in the world and we would analyze them from a secession perspective. And we did this all throughout 2022. And then we were getting ready for our first live stream. We were going to do our first live stream on election night 2022. And all of a sudden, we lined it up just perfectly. We were like, okay, it's 1 dozen. We're going to celebrate episode 12 with our first live stream. And then something came up in like the 3 weeks between episode 11 and the date of our first live stream. And we were just like, we need to talk about this, but we can't break the number sequence. So what do we do instead? And Mr. Green, to his credit, came up with this idea. He's like, why don't we just do a little supplementary show? He's like, and we'll do, he said, we'll call it Secession Speakeasy. It's like, because we're talking about forbidden topics, and so we decided, okay, we'll do that. And so we did it. That was our first episode, we talked about that. We talked about this thing that had come up, and we talked about Secession Speakeasy, and we brought drinks into the equation and everything. So, and then after the live stream, it was really weird how this happened. Suddenly I started having secession stories start popping up in certain news items that I was checking. I think the first ones that I noticed were there was Puerto Rico, there was news out of Puerto Rico, and there was news from Alberta in Canada. Danielle Smith took power around that time, and she promoted the Alberta Sovereignty Act, which the New York Times got all worked up about that, and we were like, okay, if the New York Times doesn't like it, that's probably a good sign. So we decided, and so we were like, you know what? It was like, let's change this Secession Speakeasy into a show where we talk about secession news when it comes up. It's like every time it comes up, if there's a news item, we'll pick it up, we'll go with it. And we didn't expect it to be a weekly thing. We were just like, oh, this will be something we do every so often, when there's news on secession that comes up. Little did we know how much secession news was actually out there, because it very quickly morphed into a weekly show. Because we had news out of Catalonia that came up, news out of Oregon regarding the Greater Idaho movement, news out of Illinois regarding the Illinois separation movement. It just built from there, and again, it took on a life of its own almost at that point. So it was incredible the way that it just developed from there. And we changed from Steel to Secession AM into being the supplement to Secession Speakeasy, because Speakeasy is where we take the news and we analyze it. From Steel to Secession AM is mainly where I bring on guests from these different movements, or I host discussions, where basically we hear from the no offense intended here, but we hear from the horse's mouth, on the ground.
So, no offense taken about the horse's mouth.
Yep. So anyway, so that was kind of how we morphed it into what it is today, and again, it's been an incredible ride. We eventually worked out a plan where we brought on a couple other people to help us with co-hosting, because we all have jobs in the real world, and so we have to plan these things out, and sometimes schedules don't mesh, and so we worked out a plan where we have a rotation of people who we know, who we can then bring on and have these good intellectual discussions. Yes, you see them there. So these gentlemen are they're all very insightful. They bring different perspectives, and and they're very. And if you listen to them up close, you can see they're also very entertaining with some of the humor they bring in, or some of the very I don't know how to put it. I don't want to use the word strange here, but it's sometimes they bring in insights that not a lot of people would normally think of.
Boutique.
Yes, very unique perspectives. So yeah, so that's Secession Speakeasy for you.
Who are these guys? Just real quick, maybe I don't need it. Maybe their first name and their background a little bit.
Yeah, you see up there in the top, off to the side of the American 76 flag there. That's Mr. Green, my co-founder. And he's the main co-host that we have. He works in a couple. He lives out in Idaho. He works in a couple different fields, and music is his passion, though. So if you hear the songs that we open from Steel to Secession AM with, that's his music. So he's very, very talented. Below that American flag there, you have Matt. He works in the financial world. And he's based on the West Coast, so he more Southern California. So yes, he's he's probably not going to be there much longer for health reasons, but he's there, and he has some he always is probing into the deeper meanings behind what's going on there. Then you go on the other side, you have the Liechtenstein flag there. Below there, he's not on terribly much. We affectionately know him as the factor. He likes keeping a low profile. But he works in the development world, and he comes on occasionally. It's like we've only had him on 2 or 3 times,
Okay.
but he has some very interesting insights when he brings them on too. And then on the top there, again across the screen from Mr. Green, you have Mr. Chris Goins. He works in a couple different fields. He and I worked together in journalism many years ago, and he and I kind of clicked because we both believe strongly in the Ron Paul principles. So when we talk about issues, we're often talking about it from the perspective of not necessarily libertarianism, but more the Ron Paul strain of teachings and beliefs. So, and that's usually how we approach things there. But Chris is very unique because he often asks some very, very probing questions when he's on with me. The questions that we wouldn't normally think of when we're discussing the issues. So,
I'm definitely going to ask you after the end of the show. You don't have to say yes, but if you could mention, we would love to interview Matt since he's SoCal, and if you could mention the summit to Mr. Green. But we'll talk about that later.
Yeah.
Let's get into some of it. Well, first, is there anything we missed or should have asked about the background on the show? Is there other key facts you'd like to bring up related to Secession Speakeasy that you think would be interesting for anybody watching who people may not know?
Yeah, well, the main purpose that we drive with the show is we basically say we're doing a couple different things. First, we're trying to reach out and have a forum for people who believe in secession to come and watch things from the perspective that they agree with. Because again, that was a niche that was not filled when Mr. Green and myself were first starting this, and that was the niche we sought to fill, was to say, is like, hey, people who believe in secession, they need a place to come and listen to things that are going on from the perspective that they largely agree with. That was probably the first thing that we pushed for. The other thing that we pushed for, there's a couple of different, but I'll try and sum them up here. The second one was mainly that we wanted to reverse the stigma that has been associated with the word secession. We really wanted to do that and to make people think like, hey, if these guys are discussing it, it's not such a scary word. It's like, it's not so scary. It's actually very practical. There's nothing inherently wrong about the practice of secession. I mean, this is a line I often use with people, especially if we come across a line in an article that we're discussing or whatever, where people try to make secession look like a bad thing. And I'm like, how is separation a bad thing? Aren't you supposed to separate in some cases? Isn't separation one of the ways to negate conflict? It's like, that's what I was taught. And when you look at the definition of the word secession, what does it mean? Separation. That's basically what it means. All right? There's nothing inherently wrong about the word. So we're trying to reverse that stigma in a lot of ways, as by making it a mainstream discussion talking point. And we're trying to do that here. And I'll just mention quickly, we seem to be having some effect on that front, considering that we've over the last couple of weeks now, we've had articles talking about secession in a favorable light from places like the Wall Street Journal and the Spectator and the Epoch Times. So, they're all talking about secession in a more positive light. And I know the Spectator actually cited our podcast, so which we found to be pretty cool. So, but then the other thing that we also like promoting here by discussing these topics, and again, this is oriented towards the people who are working on the secession front, is we want people to, because people can get really excited about secession, and that's great. It's like, but you also have to think through this process carefully, because secession is not something that should be done lightly. It should not be done lightly. It should be taken seriously, and it should be thought through seriously. The plan should be thought through. Okay, what are the realities of the situation? How can you approach this? What's the best approach to do this? And, there have been times where, we'd had a episode some months ago. There was a proposal for this one town to split off and join Canada. Well, when we evaluated that proposal, we were like, that's actually probably not smart. It's like, because you're in the middle of you're like one of the furthest distances away from Canada. You're going to have a West Berlin situation where you're stuck in the middle of what I mean, for lack of a better term, hostile territory. All right, you don't want that. Okay, you got to find another way to promote what you're looking for. So, so we try to get people to think about a lot of these things from the more practical perspective. We bring in news from the wider world that might affect what's going on. Like, we've got an episode coming out soon here, where we're going to talk about Greater Idaho and how they have to take into account what Trump's attitude is towards China, because there's a deposit of a certain mineral that China specializes in that they just found in Eastern Oregon. So they're going to have to take that into perspective as part of their plan to accomplish their goal. So we try to bring that in as well. Say, hey, guys, be aware of this and this, that this is going on. This is going to affect your campaign, so you need to be aware of it and plan out how you're going to address it. And so we generally try to be educational as well, in terms of getting people to think about, how do you want this accomplished? It was like, and so that's probably the best way I can describe it, is that's the main purpose of our podcast, is those three things. Is we provide an outlet for secession believers to come and listen. We try to normalize talk about secession, and we try to keep secession movements, thinking strategically about how to accomplish their end and aware of certain things that might affect their particular efforts.
That's what we call, absolutely, that's what we call normalizing the conversation. You were mentioned in a Newsweek article,
Mm-hmm.
and you had been around for a while. Since we talked to, a lot of people know about you. Even more contacts have come out. By the way, we did a show for everybody watching with the professor on the global summit, and we've had a lot of people coming through the woodwork reaching out to us, and it's been incredible to be able to network on similar goals and ideology. And I want to say thank you very much for granting us the interview and creating that pathway.
It was my pleasure. It was
I know
my pleasure.
I know you're not a Californian, but in California, we pride ourselves on. I think we had a Governor Brown who said Americans build walls and Californians build bridges. So very Californian of you. We'll just leave it there. So you're doing a super deep dive of each of the secession movements, looking into like the things that they'll need to think about, not just covering the topics, but also like, if you were really going to do this, the level of thinking that it would take. I think, the only place you see that on is, I think, with Ryan McMacken or, like you said, Tom Woods, and actually McMacken mostly, and it's just them. So
Yeah.
Your podcast has a greater reach because you've covered so many different topics. Let's show people a little bit here.
Mm-hmm.
Here's a list of some of the topics. La Jolla secession, Florida secession, New York State secession, Nigeria, Democratic Party ready to split, DC Empire, Greenland's push for independence, elites preparing for civil war, Puerto Rico, Cape independence, Montana, New York, Somaliland. That's awesome because Somaliland does not get enough attention.
Yeah.
Quebec, Illinois, Idaho secession, local Californians, right?
Mm-hmm.
San Bernardino, heard about that. It's not going to go anywhere, but that's my personal opinion. How real is Great Britain's threat against America's First Amendment? Catalan, Western Sahara, Kurdistan, Bayou Street, Granite State, Bougainville, and New Caledonia.
Mm-hmm.
Journalism secession, that's interesting. TNM supports 5 other state secession movements. That was awesome. We were one of them. And
Mm-hmm.
Dr. Speakeasy welcomes Bernard. So you've covered a variety of different secession movements for everybody watching throughout America, American territories, and then throughout the world. From what we've been looking at, you're the only show that does that. Nobody really covers secession, and nobody tries to cover it from around the world. Our summit now will be the second thing after yours to try to provide a voice to these people. And I got to say, you're doing a global service. A lot of these groups have no audience. The media will not cover them, regardless of the arguments that they have. just for everybody to watch. So, Public House Edition. This is one episode. Here's another one. Texas border crisis leading to national divorce. So that's popular news. Here's another one. Let me do this real quick. The siren call of tyranny, unification. Maybe that's not the best thing. How much longer can America go on like this? Implications of the Texas border crisis with experts.
Mm-hmm.
How did Great Britain's breakup happen with another expert? And then, as we talked about, why is secession both inevitable and good? With Lieutenant Colonel Karen Podkowski, very jealous of that. So you have covered, just for everybody to know, so he covers any sort of news on secession that you may see in covered by the news at all, which is very rare. And then he'll actually do a deep dive on how that affects or hurts the case for that group and their secession movement. In addition, he covers news that is not covered by mainstream news about what's going on in all these independent secession movements, and then provides insightful analysis on top of that. This simply isn't found elsewhere on the internet, and that's how we found him. He's kind of been a dedicated workaholic to this, carrying on the torch for years with a small rebel band and very little support. Your media mentions only came recently after you've been doing this for years. So, I mean, you are a committed soldier to this, and you've made a lot of connections. So let's do this. I was going to ask you about it.
Mm-hmm.
What were some of the most interesting episodes from this list? And then we'll go to the next list.
Yeah, well, I think probably of this list right here, I think probably the two that I can think of that were most interesting. We talked about the Montana County and then northeastern Australia there, and those were really interesting because I mean the Montana County, you saw how a higher authority abusing power, that's not always just merely a problem at a federal government level or even a state government level. You know, it's you sometimes you even see it at the county level, and the way that particular county was Missoula County was structured. Mr. Green and I went through it, and we were like, of course this is going to be a problem. It's like, you know, because basically you have two very different needs, because the needs of rural communities are going to be very different from the needs of a city community. But the city community is the one that's going to dominate because they have more people. And so basically it makes more sense for them to split. And that was what this particular movement that we covered, which was all over the news in that local area of Montana, I gather. That was the angle that we approached it with. That it was like, it makes perfect sense to split, because then both sides can have their needs met, you know, where all things are considered. And then we went through, you know, like the different proposals that they put forward. Northeast Australia was interesting because that one, people may know that Australia is not as is not as populated as, like, say, the United States. So there are areas where there are very few people hanging around, and it had the same problem. You know, it's like it had splits, you know, like where the rural areas felt that they were not getting as much as they should, you know, and the city areas, you know, were kind of upset that, you know, it's like they had to, you know, bail out these rural areas and certain other things. And we were like, well, then just split and handle your own problems. You know, it's like, and we covered a Australian senator who was going over that particular thing. Yes, that's the Montana one right there, Sealy Swan Valley. Yeah, and they're still in the process of organizing their movement, last I heard. So I mean, and we usually cover these when a news item comes out that we can then reference and say, okay, here's what the developments are as far as they say. So, although
Northern Queensland.
Northern Queensland, yes, North Queensland in Australia. Senator Matt Canavan was the one who proposed that Queensland split into two different states in Australia. So, but yeah, so those I think those were probably the two most interesting on that particular list that you had there. Although I will throw this one in here as well. The third one that kind of was very interesting was the La Jolla and San Diego situation, because that's apparently been going on for a long time, and we've covered a number of situations where where cities and counties have been looking to split. Like we talked about the news item that came out about what was it? It was St. George breaking away from Baton Rouge, Louisiana. We also had the Lost Creek in Texas wanting to break away from Austin. La Jolla kind of fell into that category, and it was also the Montana story also fell into that category. So, and yeah, here you see there's Matt Canavan there, Senator Matt Canavan. He wants Queensland to split into North Queensland and South Queensland just because they have two completely different values. And a lot of this, and again, you see this a lot, especially in Western countries, that city priorities are not always, you can't always mesh them with rural priorities. And we kind of like going through that and saying, it's like, okay, it's like, we don't want the city shouldn't be dictating what the rural does, and the rural shouldn't be dictating what the cities should do. It's like they need to handle their own problems. And and splitting is the best way to do that. You can't bring them together into one single political entity, because then one's going to push the other one around. It's like it's a matter of what you call it, majority versus minority. And and I'm a strong believer in one of the things surrounding America, which was that majority was not supposed to be given the opportunity to tyrannize the minority, and vice versa. That was one of the reasons America was found. That was one of the things that America was based on. That the original American government was based on, I believe, was that they wanted to provide checks so that one group could not basically tyrannize another group. They wanted to be able to make sure that that couldn't happen. And now, because a lot of those checks, in my opinion, have been compromised or gotten rid of altogether, secession then becomes the next step. Because when the tyranny or the lack of attention starts to get out of control, at that point you have to take the next step, which is say, okay, it's like, well, we're walking away, we're separating from you because you obviously don't care about us. That's the way it goes. So, and then, as you see there's the news article there from San Diego, La Jolla wanting to separate from San Diego. Usually when it comes to some of these California discussions, those are the ones that Matt usually discusses with me. So we had a very interesting conversation on the La Jolla San Diego situation, and weren't terribly thrilled with what the San Diego mayor had to say about this effort. He was kind of he was dismissive, and he implied attitudes that we were like, you really don't want to look at your people that way. If you're a public servant. So, but
yeah, I remember consulting with the Venice Beach secession movement from Los Angeles City.
Mm-hmm.
Was happening around the time that Calexit was really big, 2016 to 2018.
Right.
And we went down there and consulted with them, and we told them, secessions, you're right. And what they told us was that some very weird things happened in a democracy. So they had a webpage on Venice secession, and the whole thing was shut down, and none of the web servers could explain why. And they couldn't get the page back up, and none of the internet services could make it happen or explain how that happened. I'm like, that sounds like how they do it in China and Russia.
Yeah.
And that was here. And they were like, we can't explain what happened, so we don't have proof, so we can't go on TV and say, otherwise it sounds like a conspiracy theory. But we said we were going to start our campaign on day X. Literally the day before we said we were going to announce our campaign, our whole site goes down, can't get up, and no tech expert can explain it. And they just go, oh, it's just a random chance coincidence that happened to be right when you start your campaign. So that's a fact. I'm not going to say why that happened, but I saw that personally.
Mm-hmm.
And that happened. What about these? What are some of the most interesting ones out of these ones here?
Well, the Quebec one was really interesting because that was when the NDP withdrew from the coalition with Trudeau's Liberal Party, and they were talking about having a vote of no confidence in Trudeau's government. And the Quebec separatists, I think it was Mr. it was Mr. Goins, the reporter, who did that one with me, and we discussed how the Quebec separatists basically saw an opportunity and they ran with it, which was basically, we want these things agreed to in order for, because we have enough votes to stop a vote of no confidence, in the Canadian Parliament. But in order for you to get that, you're going to have to agree to these things. And which, we covered that, and we told a lot of different secession movements. We said, look, it's like these things, it's like this is the right strategy. When you get an opportunity like this, you take it and you run to put pressure on a higher authority to agree to your demands. It was like, and Quebec's not unique in this case. Catalonia has been doing that for the last several the last several months. I mean, ever since they became the kingmakers, I think it was
Oh, the
mid
recent elections,
2023.
yeah.
Yeah, no, mid 2023 elections. I think they became the kingmakers, and they've been playing that card of every way they can. And then we keep telling people, it's like, that's smart. If you get that opportunity, go with it.
Right.
And then I'll bring up here, there's the episode there, the wildfires, talking about Idaho's secession. We do this quite a lot. We sometimes there's no actual movement that comes up with some of these things, but the news comes out that the discussion is being had among the populace, and that was the genesis of that of that particular. Yeah, there you go. There's one of the news items surrounding the Quebec lieutenant, or the Quebec situation. But with Idaho, what we had there was a local radio host in Idaho who was he's very well known in that area, and he basically came out and said, if the federal government is going to let our forests burn and not engage in utter incompetence in handling our wildfires, he's like, at what point do we start considering that Idaho should leave the Union? And again, what we do this a lot. When somebody just puts forward the idea, we bring it out and we're like, okay, it's like, this is an interesting idea. How would it come about? And we did that with the Idaho one. We were like, okay, well, then how would that happen? He's like, like I said, Mr. Green lives in Idaho. So he was able to give us insight on, what the Idaho people, what might inspire the Idaho people to take these proposals seriously and to start coming up with ideas on, on how a movement for Idaho secession might form. Okay. And then we usually end those episodes by saying, okay, if you guys want this, then you've got to start organizing along these lines. Again, goes back to a mantra that we always end every show with, which is, you want solutions, then step up in your local area and actually take the initiative and actually do it yourself. It's like, because the change won't happen if you don't step up and do it yourself. You can't just sit around and wait for some political leader to do it for you. That's not how this works. It's like, it happens from the grassroots up. That's how these things unfold, and that's how these things eventually succeed. I mean, I think you can just look at the wars for independence in both the 13 colonies and in Texas to see that firsthand. That's how those started. So we often cover things like that where there's discussions that are just had on those issues. So let's see, keep going down here. Again, we also talk about threats to other countries' sovereignty. So that's why you see there Britain's threat against America's First Amendment. I don't know if it's on this list here, but that's one of the reasons we talk about Somaliland a lot, is because there have been threats against Somaliland's sovereignty. And we talk about how Somaliland can preserve their sovereignty that they've won and built up over 30 years. And so we talk about these things and how to protect what you already have in terms of sovereignty, and why that's important. It's like, it's important to not give ground on your sovereignty in any way, shape, or form. And obviously you see there Western Sahara, that was one of their problems. Some people in that area, not all, but some, gave up too quickly and conceded their sovereignty. And it's like, well, then this is what you get, where Morocco's going nuts on that particular area.
Yeah, that's a horrible situation. Basically, colonialism.
Yeah, basically, yeah, it's ugly. So that's and then you might see there towards the bottom you have where we occasionally do bring a guest on the Speakeasy, and oftentimes there, I know in that particular one you see there, Mr. Wright, He talked about personal secession, family secession, how he protected his family from certain influences that he felt were detrimental to his family. And so we talked about personal secession. I know you don't have it on this list, but you might get a kick out of this, actually, Marcus. We talked about Arnold Schwarzenegger engaging in an act of secession. I think it was a year ago, a year, 2 years ago now, where he went out and he filled potholes in his neighborhood because government was not doing it for them. So he went out and did it, and we did a whole show on that and how it was like, hey, it's like that's an act of secession. You separated from government. You separated and took responsibility for your own community. Your community took care of itself thanks to your effort. So we also bring those issues up as well. We don't see those terribly often, but we do talk about that because, again, a lot of this revolves around individual action. It's what does the individual do, and how do they help bring these things about? I actually had a discussion with this with someone on social media actually earlier today, where I said, individual action is a very key part of this if you want this to happen. It's like it depends on what you do. It's like, do you participate? Do you take the initiative? Do you step up? So.
Let's see here. What about these? Is there anything here that
strikes
out at you?
Yeah, let's look at that number 93. That covers a new political party that was formed in Canada, which was a city-only party. It was a party only for the city. And so we were like, that's good. That's good because then what you're doing is you're separating from the larger parties, which have multiple different interests. And a party that's based only in the city is going to put the interests of the city and their citizens first because they have no larger, larger interests, shall we say.
What's the name of the party?
It's a Better Calgary party based in Calgary in Alberta, I believe. So and again, Matt and I discussed this. It was a very, very interesting discussion that we had on this because, frankly, and people who watch us will probably get this impression. When you go through our stuff, we are not a fan of the political party system as it currently stands. We're just not. We have strong criticisms of all the political parties, Democrat, Republican. We've even taken shots at libertarians, even though I do sympathize with a lot of people who call themselves members of the Libertarian Party. I'm just like, it's like you guys don't do certain things very well. It's like, so we're looking at, it's like, what's the electoral reform that brings parties back to representing the people rather than political string pullers? And we thought that this Better Calgary party idea in Canada was a great idea. We were like, hey, it's like that because I know I used this quote when I had you and Mr. Wright on 2 or 3 weeks ago.
Say hi.
Sorry?
Professor Dahl.
Hello. And so what we had was, or the quote that I was thinking of was G.K. Chesterton saying, you need to keep your politicians close enough to kick them. A city only political party would do that. Because then you can actually go over and talk to your local representatives sitting on the city council. And you can also challenge them. So that was the idea behind that. So, and then Assange, we talked about him because that was around the time he got released. The journalism secession idea is he separated himself from mainstream journalism to pursue the truth. And we were like, more people need to do that. It was like, because you can't just buy into the main narrative. You've got to put forward, you got to pursue the truth no matter who gets upset or who doesn't like it. And in that episode, I think it was Mr. Goins and myself, we just discussed how we admired Assange and the example he set. And we were like, yeah, he paid a price for it, but at the same time, it's like, I'm sure he doesn't regret what he did. I'm sure there's in no way he regrets exposing the large-scale wrongdoing that went on in so many ways during, like, for example, the wars in Iraq and Afghanistan. So, and then I'll just throw this one in here finally on this list. You see there, we welcome Dr. Bernard Way. If a lot of people want to know where a lot of these secession ideas were seeded from Mr. Green and myself, it came from that gentleman. He's a retired teacher now. But he was our professor when we went to school, and
Really?
yes, he seeded a lot of our ideas. He had he basically. I think I said this when we opened our interview with him. I said, "Your two respected hosts here," I said, "would not be talking about secession if it were not for this gentleman." I said because he introduced the concept to us and showed us how it was not so crazy, and how how it was rooted in the principles of America's founding. So,
Who is this
very
guy?
entertaining interview. Sorry.
Who is this guy?
Dr. Bernard Way. He's a retired college history and political science professor.
Way is W-A-Y.
That is correct.
I'd love to interview him.
Yeah. Well, I'll see what he says. I have contact with him. I can certainly talk to him.
Okay, great. I'm gonna send you an email with all sorts of, not all sorts, but a few requests.
Okay.
If you consider.
That sounds good. I can't guarantee acceptance on the
Oh
part.
no, I get it, and it goes both ways. If you want to talk to anybody we've interviewed, etc., I get it.
Yeah, I agree.
But sometimes a friendly referral we have found is sometimes all it takes to
Yes.
make something happen. And so we don't want to miss this. This was the Newsweek article that mentioned Professor Wall, otherwise known as Grant Dahl, co-host of the Secession Speakeasy podcast.
Mm-hmm.
And they were covered in August 14, 2024. Secession movement's now in 12 states, campaigner says, by reporter James Bickerton. We've talked to him a few times ourselves. This was a big move because your work was basically recognized, and you had been doing it for years and had a large trail. And now the media was saying, you're helping to get some information out there while talking about how there's a growth in secession movements. So let me ask you,
Mm-hmm.
Well, how long have you been doing the podcast?
Well, the Speakeasy itself started in late 2022. We've been talking from Steal the Secession AM was late 2021, early 2022. So I think we've been talking secession podcasts since, I want to say, late 2021.
Okay, so started late 2021. Now it's just the start of 2025. So in about 4 years, well, actually, this article came out in 2024, towards
Mm-hmm.
the end of 2024. So we could say 4 years, really closer to 3.5 years. In 3.5 years, from starting this discussion to now, where we have the news admitting 1/5 of American states are interested in the topic of leaving America, have you seen a growth in secession interest in America? Have you seen a normalization of the conversation? Have you seen more people discussing this in general? Have you seen more rational minds discussing this in public? Basically, have you seen evidence of the attempted normalization of this conversation that you started over the last 3 years?
I've definitely seen it. I've definitely seen it. I mean, you have the Newsweek article there, and then of course earlier I mentioned that we had 3 articles that came out towards the end of 2024 from the Wall Street Journal, the Spectator, and the Epoch Times, and really what it's I think the general realization that has begun to dawn on a lot of people, and I've seen this also in conversations I've had with just the everyday person I talk to on the street or I talk to at my church or whatever. It's like they're open to the idea because I think they're coming to the same realization that Mr. Green and myself came to in late 2021, that we're just like, you know what? It's like none of the solutions we've tried are really working. They're not really working. We still have these tensions. We still have these problems. And what's the best way to resolve these? It's like, well, it's like maybe it lies in not mandating certain things over people who disagree with us. It's like, and again, that's the change in attitude that I'm seeing among the common people. When you're getting into the class that discusses these things on social media or podcasts or on news sites, they're when we first started, they treated it as like an oddity. It's like, I know we had a huge laugh over this. I think it was late 2022. Mr. Green and we were looking at a Fox News piece that was talking about they were talking about the growth of certain movements. I think Greater Idaho was mentioned there. I think the Texas Nationalist Movement was also mentioned, and they were like, it's like, and they said something. And the article author said something to the effect of the growing strength and success of the secession movement shows that these long-standing problems still exist. And we were like, what? We kind of made fun of that. We were just like, what? People wanting to govern themselves is a problem? It's like, that's the first time I've ever heard of that. It's like, but again, it's like, and that was 2022 on Fox News that they were talking like that. Now, like, for example, I'll use the Spectator article as an example of this. When you get to the end of the Spectator article that covers a lot of the secession sentiment that's growing, when you look at that, at the end of the article, he's basically admitting, he's like, well, nothing else seems to be working. I guess splitting might not be such a bad thing after all.
Right.
And that's what he says. And I do have to give credit on one thing here that I think, and because I think this was another thing that inspired us to really push this the secession conversation. I think it was sometime in 2021 that there were two prominent individuals, one on the right and one on the left, who both brought up secession and they basically said they're like, maybe this isn't such a crazy idea after all.
Yeah.
And the two individuals that I'm talking about, on the left, it was Sarah Silverman.
Yep. And Ron Perlman.
Yep. And the other one, sorry?
Ron Perlman and Sarah Silverman both said that.
Yep, they both did. And then on the right, believe it or not, it was the late Rush Limbaugh. Rush Limbaugh actually said secession might not be so crazy in one of his last episodes before he passed away.
Really? I did not know that. That's fascinating.
Yeah, I actually have a video clip of him saying that. I saved the video clip where he said that. So I mean, he said he hadn't made up his mind, and again, like I said, he died just a few weeks after he said that. But he said, yeah, I said, I haven't made up my mind. He's like, but this might not be so crazy. So basically, I think, I mean, I'm flattered that you try to give us all the credit, but I think that I think we've just played a part in making this a more accepted thing. I think these kind of sentiments have been growing in a lot of different areas as people are just looking for some way to solve the problems and stuff like that. All we've done is we've just tried to encourage people to come out and start talking about it at last.
I think you were the reporters on the ground when the story was happening. There was a story happening. Other news agencies didn't get reporters out there, so they said, see, there's no news. And you go, well, I'm going to pick up a microphone and a recording box, and I'll interview people and see what happens. And you found out there was a story, and the news was getting out now, and people are interested. Surprise, surprise, the mainstream media ignored certain topics that they didn't feel like. And just to back it up, so here we go. If you type in growth of secession movements in America, secession movements gaining traction in the U.S. amongst deepening rifts, Fox News 2022. Analysis secession movements underscore a more polarized country. Counties, blue states try to break away. That's 2023.
Mm-hmm.
Now we can fast forward to 2024. That's when the Newsweek article mentioning you came out that same year. Wikipedia changed it to over 6 states are said to have growing secessionist movements. It was reported these areas are seeing growing calls for independence. So if you look at that just briefly, 2022, 2023, 2024, 2024 backs up your timeline of the last few years. There seems to have been some sort of recognition of a interest in secession whether or not the experts think that's smart, there seems to be more interest. And that gets us into the third section of the interview I wanted to cover with you is how stable is America? How resistant to secession movements is America? Not trying to be critical, but you're not a spring chicken like myself. You've been around a little bit, let's say a couple of decades. You've seen America. How old are you, if I may ask, sir?
Uh, I'm going to speak of this as somebody who has a background in history and can see where the historical trends
Please.
usually tend to take you. I see too many parallels between with what America is today, with what Rome was towards the end of its life. Well, the Western Roman Empire, I should say. Uh, also, I would say it also bears similarities to the end of the Soviet Empire. What we're going through, I think Tucker Carlson and Matt Taibbi actually talked about that, a couple months ago when Matt Taibbi was on Carlson's show. That they said we resemble late era Soviet Union a lot, in America. Obviously, the end of the great empires at the end of World War One. There's similarities there too, if you look for them. I mean, so you look at it and you're just like, okay, it's like this is usually how empires end. The difference that we have here today, and this is what I see. I mean, like I'm going to deviate from America just briefly here. Is that I don't think that this is unique to America. I think that we're seeing a lot of the old world structures are just starting to come apart, that they're all reaching the end of their shelf life. Basically, you could say, I mean, I've actually wrote an article about this just a little while ago where I said, I call it the age of centralization. And the age of centralization, which has encompassed the whole world, I think we're in the beginning stages of the end of that age. Then because, again, America is teetering on the edge. I'm not sure how long that's going to last. Britain, France, Spain. You look across the world. Again, I think when I had you two on, I said the only two countries I don't see it in is Hungary and Russia, and that's it. Though I see it on almost everywhere else. But getting back to America, America's not stable because America has bought into this. I shouldn't say America as a whole. The American ruling class has bought into this concept of basically trying to create their own idea of the world and enforce it on everybody. All right, and that's both right wing and left wing. Okay, it's like both sides are trying to do that. Okay, it's like so basically, when you have that, that's a great destabilizer because you're going to have unhappy people no matter what happens, right? You're going to have very unhappy people, and it's also going to lead to the polarization you mentioned because then you're going to have it's going to be like competing fans at a football game. It's like where one side gets all happy and is overjoyed when their team makes a good play, and the other side's all it's like he pushed off. There was no flag. What a terrible call, and stuff like that. And then it's just going to go back and forth, and as we've seen in some football games, sometimes it comes to blows. Okay, well that's kind of where America is right now because I think Matt and I actually discussed this in an episode some months ago where we talked about how there's been this sports team mentality that's been attached to our politics that we never had before the 1940s. And, like there would be excitement and everything, it's like, but there wouldn't be the sports team mentality and just hanging on everything that was done. And that sports team mentality is not something you can bring into politics and expect good results. And I think that that's also played a role in the polarization. And I think that the ruling classes have encouraged it because they look at it as a political tool to win elections or power or whatever. All right. So, and I think this, I think that this is the key point as to why I think America's instability is only going to grow here. In order for things to change, I mean, the great novelist Charles Dickens wrote in his most famous work, A Christmas Carol, he wrote that men's courses foreshadow certain ends, unless those courses be departed from. And the ruling classes have chosen a course with all these things I just mentioned that is going to lead to breakup. Basically, they've set their ship on a course to the iceberg that's going to sink their ship. All right? And there's no impetus for them to change that course. They have no desire to change that course. So unless that course changes, it's I don't see how America stays together. I see the instability just growing as a result. And because I respect the effect that power has upon the human mind, as Dr. Philip Zimbardo brings out in his book, The Lucifer Effect, when you know how power corrupts the mind, and how it's an addiction, then you see that I don't have a lot of hope that anybody is going to come along who's going to change this course anyway, no matter how much we may want one. All right. And that's why I keep telling people, it's like, look, and that's why I always say secession is inevitable now, because there's no impetus in the people who could change this to change where we're going. There's no impetus to actually break down the structures that lead to this destabilization, the structures of tyranny, I call them. There's no impetus to break down the structures of tyranny and do what Professor F.H. Buckley recommends in his book, American Secession, which is basically return to this concept of home rule, where DC doesn't dictate to California what they do within their borders. Okay, they don't. It's like there's no. It's like DC doesn't dictate to Florida what they should do within their borders. It's like there's no impetus to change that particular approach. Right? There's no impetus to break down the structures which could keep the country together, because that would be the only way you would keep the country together, is to start breaking down those structures. And I don't see it. I don't see that there's enough impetus for that to happen. So I think that the instability is growing. I think that it's not going to stop, and I think that eventually things are going to get out of hand. I think what's going to happen is that the ruling classes are going to lose control of the course of events, and when that happens, that's when you're going to see the country is going to split into their own little sections. At that point, there's like, okay, it's like we go do our thing, you go do your thing. It's like, and then we'll come together if a major outside force we'll unite militarily temporarily if a great outside force tries to come in and conquer us. If we have a Napoleon who tries to land on our shores. I think Sarah Silverman actually proposed that when she talked about secession. She said, hey, she's like, the only reason we would need to come together is if some foreign power were to try to invade us. She's like, and then we could come together and defend each other. But then after that, we go back to doing our own thing. And I was like, yeah, Sarah, I could agree with that. I'd be fine with that. I have no problem with that. And I think that that's where we're going. So.
I have long shared the same sentiment. I had a basically liberal arts education at USC. I went and studied urban and regional planning, but it was mostly a study of history of urban design. So I didn't realize it, but I was getting a classic liberal arts education. And so we had to study a lot of Rome. And just to be fair to everybody, so, there's Donald Trump imitating something I'm not going to say. He's on stage. That's now cool to do. Here's an example of one of the Roman emperors from the new movie Gladiator 2. As you can see, he's sickly, pale. He's on spectrum, crazy, and he likes to kind of cross-dress, which is okay now, but at the time was basically they were crazy. They were nutbags. Yeah. And we can fast forward to here. There's Joe Biden waving to someone who's not there on stage at all. I said I was going to be fair. Slam Trump, slam Biden. Yep. And then here's Caracalla and Get of the Real Lives of the Mad Emperors, a Gladiator 2. These emperors more than fit the mantle of despicably deranged and dangerous. So the Roman emperors towards the end of the empire were crazy and stupid and dangerous and deceitful and not competent. And we have a president who's effectively not there with Joe Biden. And then we have another president who does things like that. That didn't happen before in American history. Regardless of your politics, you didn't see presidents who were basically brain dead. I know that Reagan had a 4-year period, but they did a much better job hiding that. And you didn't see presidents behaving in such a um, parlor humor manner, I'll say. Want to be fair.
Right.
So I completely agree that, it used to be you had to be reasonable, speak well, seem intelligent. Um, we've had two presidents back to back who I wouldn't think epitomize the best. I'm being fair to both sides, just saying there's a degradation there. The other one is currency. So at the end of the Roman Empire, you could tell the coins by the amount of gold and silver were in them. And so originally they were gold coins, then they became gold mixed with other coins. And then at the end of the Roman Empire, it was a coin with just a gold wrapping on it. And then at the very end, it was fake gold wrapping on it. So you can see the actual precious metal material. If you look at our quarters and coins today, the old coins had precious minerals, the new coins do not. The
Hmm.
dollar's value is a fraction of what it was before America moved fully off pegging the dollar to the gold standard under Richard Nixon. So the currency is following there. The other one
Hmm.
that grabbed me was that the birth of tourism started at the end of the Roman Empire.
Yep.
So tourism started as an industry there. Basically, what happened was the rich Romans were recognizing that Rome was falling apart, and it was kind of depressing. They
Hmm.
didn't really want so they spent a lot of time traveling, and they made these really elaborate traveling caravans, and that was the beginning of adventure tourism, where you could go and enjoy yourself and go to the pyramids. And so at the end, you saw to see a lot of the elites were not in Rome. They were around the world. They were traveling. They were not there. They were not running for office. They were not running for the Senate. They were kind of just taking care of themselves.
Yep.
And I remember there was a conversation by Russell Crowe last year where he said, I'm famous and I meet a lot of people. A lot of good people who want to run are not running because they don't want to get involved in it.
Yep.
So what you're seeing is more billionaires, millionaires, kind of people who have some radical agenda and got some background there. You're seeing less accomplished people who are reasonable running, and you're seeing more extremists, mob thrusted leadership coming up. That's exactly what happened at the end of the Roman Empire. The elites stopped paying attention. There's a lot more Americans now who have money, who have dual citizenship, or who have renounced their American citizenship for tax benefits. There's a lot more Americans moving to New Zealand now than ever before because they feel that America is going to collapse. So you're
Hmm.
also starting to see the elites moving out. Finally, you can look at bread and circuses.
Yes.
Um, at the beginning of the Roman Empire, yes, they had the Colosseum and they'd had bread rations, but it was like bread rations on Friday and Saturday and a Colosseum game. And then it turned towards the end of the Roman Empire, there was almost Colosseum games every day and bread rations like 2 or 3 times a day. So you can literally see from occasional help of bread and occasional entertainment to more entertainment venues. Now we're doing 2 days a week. Now we're doing three. Now we're doing four. Now we're doing every damn day of the week. And we're giving people as much porridge as they can hand so they won't revolt because the government doesn't work any well. There's nothing really holding it on except for the satiated masses. So we just have to pump them full of this. Here we are with, especially under COVID, not going to discuss it, but a lot of people sat at home and just watched movies for 24 hours. And then we have UBI being proposed and checks from the government during COVID to just stay at home.
Hmm.
So that's never happened before in American history. So when we look at the currency, when we look at the lack of interest by the elites and then moving outside of the country basically mentally already, and we look at the arrival and exigence of bread and circuses as a way of satiating the masses, those are three things that appeal to me right now, saying the parallels between modern America and that are very great. I'm 47 years old. I've been around for a while. I remember America, for all its faults, working in the 1990s. You
Hmm.
started to
As do
see
I.
dysfunction. Yeah, started to see some dysfunction with W. Bush, but you're like, well, maybe that's just him and he's an idiot and we can come back. Really started paying attention with Katrina when Bush flew over Katrina and just looked down, kind of look on his face. And then that city never got fixed. You're like, well, that's not a good sign. But there was still belief of, maybe that's just a fluke. Maybe that's just a fluke.
Right.
Then America lost in Iraq and they couldn't rebuild Iraq. And I remember at that time between Katrina and Iraq, Americans starting to going, hold on now, hold on. We used to build things and fix things for like the last century. We can't fix a country like we did in World War II, and we can't fix a major city at the same time, can we actually fix anything? Because we can't even do it for ourselves, and we can't even do it for another country that we said is the centerpiece of our entire national foreign policy and dependent on an existential threat of democracy across the world. Couldn't make it happen.
Yeah.
I think people were paying attention then, going, well, maybe we'll just get rid of Bush. Maybe we just need a competent person. We'll get Obama. He's competent. Everything will get fixed. Iraq fell apart. ISIS came. Afghanistan continued. That was a failure. Libya's a basket case. Syria's a basket case. That's all under Obama.
Yep.
Flint, Michigan does not have clean water.
Yeah.
If you talk to the African-American residents of Flint, they are not happy with Barack Obama. And so that kind of continues that Bush policy of can't really fix anything in America, can't really fix anything in the foreign world, even when we have all of the king's horses and men. Started with Bush, but I definitely noticed, Obama, you can't, for all your fanfare, you can't really do much better. Did you notice that around the same time? 90s seemed to work, and then somewhere around the 2000s, you're like, whoa, what the hell is going on here? This isn't like the America my grandpa talked about.
Yeah, I did notice that. I did notice that. I mean, as I noticed with Katrina too, that it seemed like something changed with Katrina. I mean, 9/11 was kind of a shock to the system when it happened, when I saw it happen. But when we got to Katrina, I remember looking at that and just seeing how the fallout, and like something felt different. Something felt very different. And then it was, I guess, I know for me, it came flat in my face during the financial crisis in 08, 09, when it's like when you're told that all the time. It's like if you work hard and you go get a good education and all that, you should be able to get a good job. Well, 08, 09 proved that was wrong. I lived through that. Okay, I couldn't get good employment during that period. It was like, and it's still still to this day, I've never had stable employment. That's been one of the things that's kind of always that's the thing. That's one of the things that's always jumped out at me. It's just like it's like my grandfather worked at the same bank for 50 years. It's like no chance of doing anything like that now. My father worked for the same company for 30 years. Well, no, that's not happening now. It's like no chance of doing that now. And I think that. And this actually ties into something I think that's really important, is that, and it's why I think secession is inevitable, all things considered, is that the younger generations are the ones who are sunk the most. The millennials and Generation Z in particular, because I hear from them all the time that they're just like, how much longer can this go on? It's like, I just want to, it's like, why am I being villainized for just wanting to make enough money to buy a house? It's like, why am I being villainized for that? It's like, and put down by people, and again, I hear, again, they criticize people on the left and they criticize people on the right. They're like, I don't care who's left or right. They're both don't like me. It's like, they're both criticizing me for wanting to buy a house, for wanting to make enough money to buy a house and to not be burned out by the end of it. Okay. I'm sure this, I think, is another indication of the coming collapse of the American empire. Have you seen a lot of the viral videos that come out of millennials or Generation Z coming out and having mental breakdowns on like TikTok or something like that, where they talk about how stressed out they are about that their job is like running them ragged, working 60, 80 hours a week. Okay. I mean, like, you see a lot. I mean, I've been seeing a lot of those videos over the last year and a half. And that to me is also an indication of the end of empire, because it's like when the people can't support themselves, when the bread and circuses no longer work because they're so stressed out or burned out or whatever, they can't engage in them. Well, then you're going to have, it's like your system's not going to last much longer. I actually had to laugh when you brought up a lot of the bread and circuses stuff, because as you were describing it, what came to my mind was Plato's cave analogy, right? So
remind the audience, please.
Okay, the Plato's cave analogy is basically where you have Plato described a scenario where a bunch of people are all locked down inside this cave, and they're being entertained by shadows dancing on the wall that are being manipulated behind them. It's like they have people have there's fire behind them, and there's people behind them in front of the fire who are acting out the shadows and keeping these people entertained. When the reality is what the people should be doing is that they should be going out of the cave and going up and experiencing reality on the level, on the higher ground. That's probably the best way I can sum it up. But basically the elites have tried to create this nationwide version of Plato's cave, and they're hoping that keeps people happy. But what they don't understand is that enough people are going to get bored, or they're going to finally just lose interest, or they're going to, the restraints are going to be proved to be too much for them, and they're finally just going to break out of the cave and want to come up top. So that's kind of where I see the world is right now, and I think that that's a huge part of the destabilization of the United States right now, is that basically the younger generations, they're the ones who are going to push this change. I think they're going to be the, for lack of a better term, the foot soldiers who bring this about, because they're at the attitude now, it's like, what do I have to lose? It's like, status quo is not working for me. Things have got to change. And so they're the ones who are going to drive change. And I think that's I think you're going to see some dramatic changes in leadership on that front too. I mean, I know this is kind of an old joke, but you talk about some of the people who are currently in Congress. I mean, Dianne Feinstein, she wasn't even mentally all there when she passed away, and she was still sitting in the Senate. It's like they had to walk her through how to push the button to vote yes when she was in the Senate, and then they had, and not to pick on just Democrats here. I saw a story a few weeks ago. A Republican congresswoman, I think she was from Texas. She was found wandering around in a dementia-ridden state in a neighborhood in like Dallas or something, and she was still sitting. She was still a sitting congresswoman, and she didn't resign. They had to put her in a nursing home for dementia, and she never resigned. I think she was just absent for like the last 9 months of her term, sitting in a nursing home. Okay, so it's like, I mean, to me, you look at that and you say to yourself, okay, it's like, maybe the people who've been holding power or exercising power have been doing this for too long, just way too long. It's like, maybe we need fresh blood, but you know what? The structures are designed to prevent fresh blood from getting in, unless you're picked by the ruling classes.
What are you talking about? America has free and open elections, and any citizen can participate. There is no such thing as a golden chalice run or people chosen from cigar-filled back rooms who get to run for us. Right? That's what I've heard on TV. Must be true.
I've heard that on TV too, but actually, you read this book was actually written by two guys who were left wing. You read the book "Vote Scam" by James and Kenneth Collier, and they were in the 70s and 80s, and they exposed that our election system. They put forward a very persuasive case that our vote system's been compromised since the 60s, at least. That our electoral system's been compromised since then, based on their own investigations. And again, these guys were left-wing, all right? James, they were running in the Democratic Party and stuff like that, although they tried to bring it to the attention of both parties. And this was a common theme, you look through their story and you find out nobody wanted to touch it.
What?
Yeah, nobody wanted to touch it. It's like, oh, I wonder why. I wonder why.
Is this the part where I act shocked?
Let me show you
tell
my
me when. You tell me when, and I'll go, what? When it's the right time, but I don't want to do it too soon.
Right.
We have a picture of that book. 1 second here. Let me pull that up.
Okay.
Here's the book, Vote Scam, The Stealing of America by James and Kenneth Collier.
Yeah.
Records a fascinating and daring investigative reporting project. Most astonishing nonfiction detective story of the 1990s. An explosive investigation tracks down, confronts, and names the establishment crooks who elegantly steal the American vote for their own profit. comes face to face with the Supreme Court, who rigged a vote fraud case, the most powerful female publisher in America, who won't let her newspaper TV stations deal with vote rigging, and cast the politicians, computer wizards, professors, lawyers, news people, aristocrats, CIA operators, outraged citizens, conspiracy buffs, and crusaders involved in a scandal of unthinkable dimensions. This is what you were referring to?
Yes, this is the book I'm referring to. Yes, it was eye-opening to me when I read this book. It's I mean, the stuff that they found, and when you read through it, I'm not going to name names here, but when you read through that book, some of the names that they mention in that book were still serving in the halls of power,
Yeah.
like within the last 10 years. Okay.
Yeah.
So it's this book, I think, was, I mean, again, I'm a historian. I collect a lot of history books. When I write about the unraveling of America, this is one of the books that's going to be referenced quite heavily, because I think that this has played a huge role. And what I tell people is that I think what the Collier brothers stumbled on was they stumbled on the effort to institutionalize election rigging, okay, in any form. I think that's what because I mean, people like talking, like saying, it's like, well, vote fraud is something that happens in almost every election. It's like, yeah, that's true. It's happened throughout American history, but it's never been institutionalized. What the Collier brothers seemed to stumble on was that the vote fraud and election rigging aspects were institutionalized. That's what they seem to prove in this book. They put forward a very compelling case that it started sometime at the 60s at the latest. It might have been earlier than that. I know that people have said Lyndon Johnson was former President Lyndon Johnson was extensively involved in election rigging back before he became president. So there's pretty at least some of the researchers of Johnson's life have said that there's evidence of that.
There's some evidence for Kennedy too, I've heard.
Yeah, Kennedy as well.
In the South and in Chicago.
Yep. So, but it was never institutionalized.
Sure.
Until now, until what the Colliers found.
This was the book that I read that started me on the secession path, just for everybody for sharing memories. It's called The Breakdown of Nations by Leopold Kohr. Yep. Leopold Kohr wrote this book in the 1950s.
Mm-hmm.
He said that countries can become empires accidentally, and then when they're on that path, they just gobble everything up until they become a irresponsible leviathan, and they can't manage. He said in the 1950s, there were two countries doing this that were on this path to empire and eventual breakup. One of them was called Russia, and the other was called America. Yep. He said they had similar trajectories of conquering nearby territories, controlling everything over the last century, building up a giant empire with no limits, and trying to coordinate the whole thing. And they were becoming these gigantic empires, which would not be able to function, predicting the fall of the Soviet Union in the 1990s by 4 decades before anybody else. This book was not well known because nobody wanted to hear how America was doing the same thing that Russia was doing in the 1950s. Soviet Union had to be the exact opposite. So we don't need to hear about you, Leopold Kohr. He predicted political division in America, and he predicted the breakdown of the Soviet Union by almost half a century before anybody else. To back up some of the other things you said, here's a picture on Dianne Feinstein. And this is just to prove how, it's the end of Rome and it's the breakdown. Dianne Feinstein gave her power of attorney to her daughter, meaning the ability to make all legal decisions. But she kept staying on in Congress to vote. So she said, I no longer have faith in my own ability to make personal decisions for myself. I'm going to hand that to my daughter, but I still have faith in my ability to make decisions for all of America and vote based upon it. So doesn't get more egregious than that.
Yep.
You're basically saying, I'm sorry, I'm brain dead. I need to have my daughter do this, but I can still make votes in Congress and vote for everything. Okay. Didn't we just see this guy waving to nobody?
Yeah.
So here's a second person. Then to back up a little bit more, here's the employment rate of men from the 1990s to the year 2023. You can see a statistical drop This is what he's talking about. More unemployed men. Employment is hard to get. This
Yes.
is not typically discussed because I really don't want to get into it, but whenever I see people try to talk about men's issues, they're laughed at or called sexist and a bad person. So it never really seems to go anywhere. I know Michael Smirkanish on CNN has tried to get this into the mainstream. He's the only one. Most people laugh at it, think it's funny and don't cover it. Here's another statistic showing damningness. This is in California, but it's homeowner insurance rates. So somewhere homeowner insurance was high in the 80s, basically hit a low in the late 80s, 90s, and then it's just dropped ever since. So we're going from 60, maybe 70% of people in America and California owning a home to maybe 52%. So it's definitely been a drop. We're not below 50, it appears, but you can look at these trend lines. They're only going one place. This is over multiple decades.
Right.
Employment for men, home ownership dropping. Those were the two key things that made America work. They're not working, and here we are returning to the, Roman Senate emperor times. So,
Yeah.
completely agree with you.
Yep.
Where does this go? Oh, first, I want to show you a couple other stats and ask your opinion. So this was a poll from Center for Politics, Sabato Crystal Ball at the University of Virginia, 2021. 80% of Biden voters, I have come to view elected officials from the opposite party as a clear and present danger to American democracy. 84% of Trump voters, I have come to view elected officials of the opposite party as a clear and present danger to American democracy. The phrase clear and present danger is typically reserved when talking about an ISIS terrorist attack or a Russian nuclear strike. And yet here we are using it to describe elected officials in America of the opposite party. About 4/5 of both parties view all elected officials of the other party as not just opposition, but a threat to America. I'd also like to show you this. Marjorie Taylor Greene, obviously national divorce. She called for it. It's not working. And finally, to get back at your point about there's a difference between rural and urban areas, this is what's called a landslide election county map. So a landslide election county is where the Republican candidate always wins over the Democratic candidate by 20 percentage points, or the Democratic candidate always wins over the Republican candidate by 20 percentage points. Basically, don't even try. So you can go to 1992. All the blue areas were areas where Dems won 20% over Republicans by county. The red areas are where Republicans won over Democrats over 20% by county. And the gray represents what we would call a competitive election, where the people are actually open to either the Republican or the Democrat. Another term for that is working democracy. So fast forward to 1992, then you go to 2012. It's almost all red and blue. Very little gray. Gray's almost completely wiped out. What that means is there's almost no competitive election areas. Then we can fast forward to the year 2024, and here we go. So all that red and blue basically means landslide elections.
Yep.
Well, how do you make a country that's, I mean, look, we can go back to 1990. Most of the country is gray.
Yep.
Yes, there's some red. Yes, there's some blue. But even the blue, there's a smattering of red. And even in parts of the red, there's a smattering of blue. And most of the country is gray. It's competitive. That's wiped out by 2012, which is over a decade ago into the past. And it's extra wiped out. So this trend keeps going. You're talking about how rural and liberals, rural and urban have value divides. If this trend of people moving into separate communities and becoming so ideologically glued that the opposition party has no chance of running an election there has gone on from the 1990s to 2024, or a 3-decade-long period. How do we undo this to get to the point where all Americans can live together and we're not as polarized and divisive as we are now, given that it took 30 years to get here?
I think there's only one way that I think there's only one real answer to that, and that is that you have, because what I see in addition to what you just laid out, that same stretch during that same stretch from the 1990s to 2024, what did you also have? During that same period, it didn't matter whether it was Republican or Democrat. The federal power, the federal bureaucrats and powers in D.C. took more power away from the states throughout all of that period. All right, that was like the number one thing that never changed throughout that entire period. So when you have it where it becomes a winner takes all situation, which is not what the American founders intended for this country, right? It's not what was intended at all. Okay, they wanted it because they knew, because when the Americans, because when the America was founded, the founding fathers knew that there were sections of this country that were very, very different. Massachusetts had nothing in common with South Carolina except that they were in geographically the same general location. Okay, uh, I mean, and that was the case with all of the states. I mean, Virginia had nothing in common with New York. I mean, Virginia even had very significant differences from their next door neighbor in Maryland. So, and again, I could go on and on and on. There's all of these states that were very different. So, what the American founding fathers determined, and they put this in the Constitution and in the Bill of Rights, they said, what powers are not explicitly given to the federal government are reserved to the states.
Right.
And the reason they did that was because they knew that if they didn't do that, the country would not stay united. They knew that. All right? And that's a lesson that I think America's been losing it since well, let's put it, I shouldn't say all of America. I should say what shall I call, the ruling class in America they started to slowly lose that concept beginning in the 1860s. I think everybody knows what I'm referring to there.
Got it.
It started there, and then it had periods where it would grow more. I mean, like it accelerated under Teddy Roosevelt, Taft, and Wilson. You had another period where it accelerated under FDR and Truman and Eisenhower, Kennedy, Johnson. Nixon and Ford also didn't help. Carter didn't help. I mean, again, I am a big fan of Reagan, but I also acknowledge he had a lot of problems. Reagan, I think, tried to scale some of that back, but I don't think he did a good enough job. I think he let himself get talked out of things that he shouldn't have. And then when you got the older Bush in there, it was just full steam ahead, and it accelerated after he came in. And then it accelerated through Clinton, the younger Bush, Obama, Trump, Biden, and now Trump again. Okay, it's like and the trend was always take the power away from the states. DC is going to dictate everything. Okay, and then you got this really dangerous political Molotov cocktail that you're putting together, where you have accumulating power in one power center, so it becomes a winner take all, and it becomes, in the eyes of some, a life or death situation.
Right.
You tie that in with them making it, as I referenced earlier, turning politics into like a team sport, and stuff like that, where, you can throw out all kinds of things and get all worked up over these things. You bring the sports team, the cheering for sports team mentality into the political arena. That's also a very dangerous thing there. And you tie that in with the ruling class, with what I think could end up being the spark to this whole thing. The ruling classes just sitting up there trying to manipulate everything to their benefit, while the rest of the country, regardless of ideology, has their life situation go down the tubes. All right? You tie all of that together. And I think that I think that that's why you make it so that the country cannot stay together. All right. And I mean, I have my differences with Mrs. Marjorie Taylor Greene, but I did like the fact that she brought the national divorce idea to the general public and got them to start talking about it. I am glad that she did that because I think because the thing that you don't want, and this is what I fear, the thing that you don't want is you don't want to unfold in America a true civil war. Now, some people may wonder what I mean by that. What I mean by that is when you look back at the unpleasantness of the 1860s, what you had that a civil war defined the strict definition of a civil war is two or more factions fighting for control of one government. Okay, that didn't happen in the 1860s. It was a war of separation. One group of states wanting to separate from another group of states. All right, that was not a true civil war. But what it seems like certain people are content to either promote or let happen in America is they want a true civil war where there's two factions fighting for control of one government. And they're trying to compartmentalize people into two camps, just into two camps. It's like you're either on this side or you're on that side. It's
Right.
like, and you have to fight the other side to get what you want. And there's no and again, I think it all boils down to that it's also centered in a worldview, which is basically the government, especially the higher governments, are the be all and end all. And I don't want to get into the religious element here, but I'll just say that they've made it almost a religion. And I think that that's also a very dangerous attitude to take with politics. Yeah, there you go. See, I think that movie was trying to acclimate people to the idea and make them think that, yeah, we should do that. It's like this isn't. It's like Civil War is. They're trying to make people used to it. Okay, and Hollywood often does this. Has anybody noticed that? A quick tangent here. Has anybody noticed that in the years leading up to 9/11, there were a lot of movies about terrorism leading up to that?
Yep.
They were acclimating people to the idea. All right. And then in the lead up to certain other things, we had a lot of dystopian movies like The Hunger Games or Divergent. Okay. Acclimating people to the idea of, ruling class, being over top of, little runts on the ground. Okay. It was trying to get them acclimated to the idea. Now you got this movie. All right. So basically, and I think this is another reason that drives myself and my co-hosts to talk about these topics, is that we're trying to get people to say, no, there's another approach here, which is we let the structure that's causing the tyranny fail. We let it fail, we disassemble it, and we all go our separate ways, and we rebuild in our own areas. We take back control that the founders originally gave us. Okay? And I know some people have criticized me of being unpatriotic by talking about this.
How so?
Well, because I mean, again, I'm going to be charitable to them here. I think that what they get confused is that they think that loyalty to the government that's lasted since 1789 or 1789? Yeah. This government that's lasted since 1789 tied in with the borders that we currently have, and it's like, and all of these other things. They think that is what America is. And to me, I always come back at them and say, no. It's like my loyalty is to the principles upon which this country was founded. And if that means that we have to break up into smaller countries, smaller self-ruling areas, that's actually patriotic, because that's the spirit that the founders, with which the founders established this nation. So I think that's why I consider still myself patriotic, because it's like I'm trying to preserve the principles, which is different areas doing their own things, ruling their own lives. Okay, that to me was the genesis upon which America was founded. Okay, with the local areas taking care of themselves. Because look at early America. Massachusetts and South Carolina, completely different. Okay? Couldn't stand each other. All right? But they stayed as part of one union. Why? Because Massachusetts was left to do what they felt was good for them. South Carolina was left to do what they felt was good for them. All right? That's why they stayed as part of the union, because they were left alone. All right? And that's why, but to me, the structures are such now. The structures as the American government has been added onto are such that unless you get somebody who's willing to go in like a bull in a china shop, and I don't see anybody, and sorry, Trump's not that guy. Okay. I don't see anybody who's willing to do that. Okay. The only one I saw who even came close was Ron Paul. And we saw what the elites did to his campaign. All right. So I don't see there's no way to do this thing, to break apart the structures and keep the country as one entity, because too many people have too many things invested in this bigger structure. So what you need to do is that the structure needs to come apart in order for freedom to return. Okay, and that's the only way you're going to take power back. Okay, and I'll finish with this. The American founders realized that because they knew they couldn't fix London. Okay, you read Buffett's book Conceived in Liberty, where he talks about early America. Okay, the American founders knew there was no way they were going to fix London, so that's why they separated. All right, that's why. Okay, and I think a lot of Americans today, and I think this also goes for people in Canada and Mexico and Europe, all the countries in Europe, Africa, Asia, just all around. You can't fix what's going on in your national capitals. All right, you can't fix that. Right, the best way you can do is to just separate. Okay, separate from them, saying we no longer are under your authority. We're going to rebuild on our own. Okay, and eventually, I think we're going to get to a point. I mean, this is where my hope is. I think if we can kick off this idea of peaceful secession, and keep it as peaceful as we can,
right?
Then what you're going to have is you're going to leave the ruling classes sitting there as kings without subjects, and that's going to be the best scenario possible. So
that's similar to what Lieutenant Colonel Karen Kwiatkowski said. She did an episode of Judge Napolitano.
Yep.
Where she talked about unraveling and secession. And she said that, let's see here. Well, here's the episode information. Is minute 1637 to 1847. We're going to do a show on this, on secession and unraveling. Karen Kwiatkowski on Judge Napolitano. She said what you said. There may not be a declaration of we're independent. There may just be states like grabbing more powers and ignoring more federal things over time. And so what would happen is the federal government could tell everybody, we're still a united federal government. We're still in charge. But the reality is the states actually had power and they didn't really have any power. That way the states could have power, but you wouldn't have to have a civil war because you never actually confront the federal government, the fact that they're losing things. So they could save face by telling people lies on television that gets them elected. But in reality, the power shifted to the states and they operate in a de facto return to federalism. That was her prediction. So I'd love to ask her about that. But anyways, that was her prediction. That's what she said. Here is this that I wanted to ask you about. Now, I have had this debate with many people because I believe that you can talk about secession too. And I have family members in the Marine Corps, Army, Navy, Air Force, and Coast Guard, basically all 5 branches. And I've heard it before. This is not loyal. This is disrespectful to the veterans in World War II. It's disrespectful to the veterans. And I go, how so? Because I know exactly why you fought. And I know exactly why you were in the Marine Corps, Air Force, Army, Navy, Coast Guard. How do I know? And the veterans will look at me like, how dare you say that? How could you know that? And I go, well, because you have to give an oath before you're admitted into that unit. Period. End of story. So you don't make this oath, you don't get to be in any of the branches. What does the oath say? I do solemnly swear or affirm that I will support and defend the Constitution of the United States against all enemies, foreign and domestic, and I will bear true faith and allegiance to the same, and that I will obey the orders of the President of the United States and the orders of officers appointed over me. Here's one from the Army. Here's from the Army Education Center, and here's one from the Air Force. You can see they're basically all the same. It's an oath to the constitutional process.
Yep.
So if freedom of speech and peaceful assembly are still part of the process, and we are not talking about violently overthrowing the government and breaking away in a form that is completely antithetical to the Congress, then what we're doing is absolutely in line with what every soldier, airman, Marine said they were joining the military to do.
Yep.
So I always confront people who say you're unpatriotic, and I go, tell me how, because you swore an oath to this. So unless you're going to say all the military people were liars when they took an oath, which is a huge insult to all military people, saying you're liars and you can't take an oath, then this is what they meant when they joined. This goes back over a century. So this also includes the World War II veterans.
Yep.
As long as you're working the constitutional framework, we're not doing anything unpatriotic. And this is literally the reason why they fought and died. Most of them aren't aware of it, but I bring this up every time and I go, tell me how I'm violating that. Because that's why you actually served, not I served because of 50 states on the a flag and a picture of America, or because I watched Opie and Andy Taylor and I just have nostalgia. No, that's not it. You literally gave an oath to this, saying this is the reason why I served. This is the reason why I joined. You didn't give other oaths. And unless you're saying you lied about this oath, then this is the reason. So I don't see how it's unpatriotic unless you're talking about violently overthrowing the government. If you're talking about anything within the reference of the Constitution, freedom of speech, organized assembly, it's simply inappropriate. It's simply basically put inappropriate to call us as anything other than patriots because we're following that.
So, I agree with you. I agree with you.
And I have to bring that up all the time.
Yeah, no, I like I said, I don't have to bring it up a ton, but a few times that I have, that's usually what I come back with. It's like your oath was to the Constitution, not to the government.
That's because I would hear, what about the World War II soldiers? You're breaking up in America. And I remember looking up, there were not 50 stars on the flags in World War II.
Right.
There were not 50 states in America in World War II. None of the World War II soldiers fought for 50 stars and 50 states. But if you talk to veterans now, they're like, that's what it's about. Okay, well, if that's what it's about, how did World War II soldiers fight for that when that didn't exist at that time?
Mm-hmm.
Right? Yeah. So it doesn't make sense when you look into it. So yeah, we are not unpatriotic, and there's nothing wrong with having this discussion as long as you're talking about using it within a general constitutional framework. I always make sure to point that out because I've been confronted by family relatives many times, and I've had to educate many of them about actions they actually took decades earlier. And the look on their face is kind of shock and disbelief. But I go, you can look it up online. I'm not making up. Just go Google military oath of enlistment for officers or for enlisted. It's the same thing. It's always going to say this. It will never say a flag, a map, some sort of emotional connection to nostalgia. None of that's in there. So
right.
We're leaving it. We're going to end it here. Anything I didn't ask you? Any key major points you want to make? Final thoughts. What would you like to leave the readers or viewers with?
Well, I would just say, I would just say, it's like, folks, I mean, I know I've mentioned this a couple times over the course of our conversation. It's like, I hearken back again. I quoted this in an article I wrote just recently. Tom Paine in Common Sense said, "We have it in our power to make the world over again." And I believe we're entering one of those stages right now, okay? Because of all the things we've talked about here, okay? And to me, it's like, if you want things to change, I mean, I remember there's this cartoon. I've seen a number of more religious figures share it, where you got it's two stages. The top one, it says the speaker at the podium is telling a whole group of people, he's like, "How many people want change?" Everybody raises their hand. And he says, how many people want to change? And you only get 2 or 3 to raise their hand. And so what I keep telling people all the time is like, look, it's like this can happen, but only if you take action, get involved in some way. You don't have to lead a whole movement like Marcus does or like Daniel Miller does with the Texas National
Great
Movement.
man.
You don't have to be the leader. You can just be somebody who sets up a table outside. Let's say you live in Kansas. All right, you can set up a table outside your local at your local fair or whatever, and just have a thing there and say it's like could Kansas be an independent country? It's like, come talk to me about it. Okay, you can do something as simple as that. All right, down in Texas, I know they do that all the time, and I think they do that in a couple other states as well, like New Hampshire. I'm pretty sure they do it in New Hampshire. I think they're starting to do that in Louisiana. I could be wrong, but I know that that's been done. It's like, and that's a very simple little thing you can do, okay? But you need to take the initiative and get people to start talking about it, because this always goes in stages, okay? And like the movements like Greater Idaho and Illinois Separation are finding this out right now, okay? It started as a conversation, all right? Just a conversation among the people. Then it became a matter of referendums. They got the referendums on the ballot. They started to win these referendums, okay? People started to talk about it. And now, I know this has happened in both cases. Now what's happened? In Indiana, they're now proposing bills that they want to talk to Illinois about taking in those counties. That conversation's now moved to the state legislature. Okay? That's a very, very big thing here. Is like, it's taken that big step. And now I just learned yesterday that I don't know if they're going to actually get a vote on this, but Greater Idaho, they introduced a bill into the Oregon legislature where they want to talk with Idaho about this. They're saying, like, let's at least start talking about it. Okay, so that conversation is being had in the Oregon legislature, and I know that there are many in Idaho, the Idaho legislature, who want to have this conversation. Okay, so it's a process. Okay, but it always begins at the grassroots, among the people, the ordinary people on the ground. Start having the conversation. That's why I am fully expecting we're going to start seeing talk from southeast Colorado, because they're having conversations about joining Texas, and also in New Mexico they're talking about that. Okay, again, I hear these talk that there's conversations being had. So I'm fully expecting these movements. Northern Maine, I had Eric Brakey on a couple months ago. Okay, he started the conversation about Northern Maine joining New Hampshire. Okay, the conversation's been started. I fully expect that movement to start out. Okay, and then talk about that lady in New York. She was like, well, it's like, we're not getting a fair deal here. It's like, maybe we should secede and either become our own nation or Canada. It's like the conversation started. Good. The conversation started. That's what you need. So that's what I tell people all the time. I tell people, if you want this to happen, start having the conversation. All right? Start with the conversation. Find like-minded people. Start convincing people around the fence. People think that everybody's opposed to it. It's like, no, there's a lot of people on the fence. All right?
That's absolutely true. There's a lot of people on the fence. Yeah.
Yes. You need to find those people. And then again, I love that Daniel Miller brought this up. He's like, find the people who already are on board with you, connect and network with them, and then start talking with the people around the fence. Okay? Start convincing them, bringing them into the fold. Okay? That's what you do. Okay? And then your movement grows, the conversation starts being had. If you're able to have referendums, they'll start being had. You start having conversations, city council, eventually gets to legislature. Eventually it's going to work its way up. Okay? And there's going to be, and then you're going to be ready to take the dive when either DC completely implodes, which I think is very possible, or you start seeing scenarios not too dissimilar to what happened in Massachusetts in 1775, before Lexington Concord, with the British, coming in and doing certain actions. You're going to start seeing that, and then right of self-defense kicks in. All right. Again, I'm not endorsing that. I don't want that to happen, but history tells us that, things could go that way. All right. But again, it all starts with the conversation. It all starts with that. All right. So that's what I would just encourage. That's what I would leave everybody with is like, start having the conversation, folks, no matter where you are. Okay. Start having that conversation. Start talking with people. Okay. And Marcus, if you don't mind, I'm going to plug 2 to 3 resources here that people can.
Please do.
Okay. Okay. These are 3 that I would definitely tell people to, if you want to convince people, read this yourself and share it with others. The first one,
Right
F.H.
on.
book, American Secession. Okay. He has excellent. I mean, I've interviewed this guy. He makes a very solid case here. All right, very, very solid. All right, that's the first one I would recommend. Second one, Ryan McMakin, Breaking Away. All right, also very excellent resource. Okay, he puts it in practical terms. I love this book. Okay, because he talks about all the common objections that come up. All right, and he debunks them like thoroughly. Okay, I think we cite this book quite frequently in our podcasts. So that would be the second one that I would promote. And then this one that just came out, National Divorce by Jason Fry.
Read that. Yeah.
Yes. All right. I mean, Fry writes for the everyday person here, and he makes a very compelling argument. Okay. So again, I would recommend these 3 books. All right. These are the 3 that if you're looking to get the conversation started, if you're looking to convince people, those 3 books. All right. So I can't recommend them enough.
Just for everyone, we did an interview with Francis Buckley. You can look it up here on the channel. Also in that book, I myself and Calixet are mentioned as most probable secessionists. So we like that book. We also did an interview with Jason Fry. You can also find that here. Very exceptional scholar.
Yep. And I did an interview with Jason Fry as well right after the book came out. So
I'm glad the conversations get normalized. The way I should see it is that there should be more people interviewing them, and you and I shouldn't even be doing it. It should be on mainstream TV, but that's never going to happen. So it is us. So the more people getting into the conversation, the more it gets normalized. You're going for the same goal we are.
Yep.
Why is it scary and wrong to have this conversation? I thought this was a democracy.
It's well, you know what? I'm going to make a distinction that I made in a conversation I was having this morning. Depends on who you talk to as to who it's scary for, because
Fair enough.
They're not scared. The young people are not scared of this conversation. Okay, I talk to people my age and younger all the time. They're very open about it. It's the older people that you generally have to convince.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Okay? And again, that's not a general thing. Okay, I have come across young people who are totally opposed to it. I've come across older people who are all in favor of it. Okay, so it's not but again, the general trend is the young people are not scared of it. The older people generally are, so you have to be a little more careful in how you approach it.
That's what we found here.
Yep.
That's what we found here, except recently, a little bit older women, just because of the abortion issue, but typically, yeah, it's people 18 to 35. We thought you had a 2/3 chance of getting a yes if you talk to somebody 18 to 35, and you had a 2/3 chance of getting a no if you talk to someone 45 and older, is what we found. So I'm 47, I'm an outlier, but we were well aware of the statistics. Okay, we'll leave it there. I'm going to email you a copy of the show, and I'll have a few questions for you then. We'd love to have you back. We'd love to keep the conversation going. I think we're both doing important work, elevating this conversation and normalizing it. And I look forward to more voices coming on and trying to do what you and I are doing. I'll send you a copy soon, and I'll have some requests for if you would be willing to ask for invite. I get, everybody's an individual.
I can certainly ask. There's nothing wrong with me asking.
I get it, and they accept or they don't. I totally understand. I think it. All right, we'll leave it there. Thank you, Professor Wall.
Thank you.
We'll see you again soon.
Take care.